everyone, and I'm going to be trying to do a few lectures during the course of this term to just kind of talk over a little bit some of the information that we'll be talking about during the week. So here we are in week 3, Semana 3. Y esta semana es formar versus informar y el verbo ser. No? So this week we are talking about the formal versus the informal, as well as the verb ser. No? So this week, let's just talk a little bit about the formal versus the informal. So you do watch a video on the formal versus the informal, but I just wanted to talk about two things having to do with the formal versus the informal. One is that in a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, the difference between formal and informal is really important. So it depends a little bit on the country that you're in, because of course every Spanish-speaking country is a little bit different, but in a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, using a formal is a mark of respect to the person that you're talking to. Now, it depends a little on the country. This will go into something that maybe you'll be a little bit more familiar with in another, maybe in Spanish 2 or maybe a little later in Spanish 1, which is the difference, right, between something that we call tuteo, voceo, and ustedeo. This is what we call this phenomena in Spanish, which is all the different ways that in Spanish you can say the word you, right? It kind of gets a little bit into that. I'm just gonna look at it very briefly, right? And I'll show you how some methods are informal and how others are formal. If I said, ¿Cómo estás? No? It's understood, no? That I am saying, ¿Tú cómo estás? No? So in that context, that's an informal context, and I can only refer generally to one person. Now, in a lot of countries where vosotros is not something that is used, right? If there was a you plural, regardless of whether the context is formal or informal, they would use ustedes, right? After that, in a plural context. So if I'm talking to one person, right, I might say, ¿Cómo estás? But if I'm talking to more than one person, I might say, ¿Cómo están? Right? And I would switch into that ustedes, and it would be very natural. In some countries, in Central and also in South America, particularly Argentina, in Costa Rica and some other areas, there are lots of areas that use what we call voceo, but I won't name them all. They might use a vos, right? ¿Cómo andas vos? No? It's informal. It is generally used whenever vos is used with family and intimate friends. Yeah? Okay? And in Spain, there is a form of informal that is plural that we call de vosotros. Now you do learn it in this class, but it's actually only used in Spain. And I think my Spanish instructor, as in my instructor that is from Spain, told me one time that it's only even used in like 80% of Spain. So there are whole areas of Spain, like las Islas Canarias, where vosotros is not used and where they would use usted and ustedes. So it's a very small part of the Spanish-speaking world that generally tends to use vosotros. Vos is actually more common than vosotros in the Spanish-speaking world, but it's less common in textbooks. But vosotros is very common in textbooks, as we tend to default to Spain in the way that we organize textbooks. And then we would say, ¿Cómo estáis? No? And if we were talking in a formal context, right? So we're talking to somebody important. That'd be somebody that we don't know, right? So we want to show respect to that person that we don't know. Or we're talking to someone who is above us, right? Like a boss. Or we're talking to someone who we have to show respect to, like maybe like a professor or a person in authority. Then we want to use a vosotros, or we want to use, I mean, en ustedes, right? And that's form is sometimes called ustedeo, right? Meaning we use a more formal context, right? So, excuse me, we definitely want to use usted or ustedes, ¿ya? ¿Cómo está usted? Perdón. ¿Cómo está usted? ¿No? O, ¿cómo andan? Now, when we use ¿cómo está with usted, almost always we're going to have the usted there, right? It won't necessarily be always understood because this form can be used for other forms. But you'll notice, right, in this question, again, right, the usted has gone after the question, yeah? So we have verb, then subject order, so we have different subject verb order than normal. And you notice that in a lot of these, right, the subject has been left out because it's simply understood. Or we might have a plural, right? ¿Cómo andan? This is something that my family says quite common, right? They won't say ¿cómo estás? They might say ¿cómo estás? Or ¿cómo están? If they're asking more personally. But they tend to say ¿cómo andas? No? O ¿cómo andan? How's it going? Yeah? As a way of greeting. Now, whenever somebody asks you in a Spanish-speaking culture how you are, similar to how somebody might ask you in English, oftentimes the only appropriate answer is fine, right? Unless somebody comes up to you and says, no, I really want to know how you are, right? It's not an opportunity for you to kind of unload all of your things, but really more of an opportunity for you to just say, oh, I'm good, and keep going, right? And the way that you would say that is bien. Another thing that I would say about the formal versus the informal is that unlike in English-speaking culture, there are particular things that you have to do in a formal setting to greet everyone and also to say goodbye. So, like for example, right, in some Spanish-speaking countries, it's common to greet people with a kiss on the cheek, yes? And you have to do this to every single person in the room. You must do it for everyone, because if you don't do it for one person, you've slighted them, okay? So, and then whenever you say goodbye, before you can leave, you have to go up to every single person at that event and say goodbye and give them a kiss on the cheek. It's just the way that it's done. It's not like in English-speaking culture, if someone was going to leave, right, a party, they might, bye, right? We don't do that, right? We gotta go up to every single person and say goodbye and talk to them one-on-one and, you know, officially say goodbye. And that means that sometimes saying goodbye can take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to an hour. Or sometimes if you get really bogged down in a conversation with someone, it can take even longer. This is why, right, in a lot of Spanish-speaking culture, we don't put time limits on how long we spend with each other. There's a time for everyone to arrive. Sometimes that time is honored. Other times, in a lot of Spanish-speaking cultures, right, that time is just a starting time. And oftentimes the party starts a couple of hours later. Or, you know, but we don't put a limit on it, right? You wouldn't ever go to a baby shower in a Spanish-speaking culture and have it start at a certain time and end at a certain time. That's a very American way of looking at time. Okay, so let's move on to talking about ser. Ser is how we talk about to be. Now, okay, to be. Now, in English, we would say, I am, you are, he is, she is, we are, you are, yeah? They are. So I can write that here. I am, you are, he is, she is, we are, you are, and they are. You'll notice what's missing and what's different. First of all, these don't have any gender, right? Except for this one. He and she is, right? Or it is. There's no gender, right? Here, there's no masculine, feminine version of they, right? to indicate whether I'm talking to a group of women or whether I'm talking to a mixed gendered group of people or whether I'm talking to a group of people that are all men. There's no gender for you, for example, right? Vosotros has a feminine form and also a masculine form and a mixed gender form, right? Which is the non-marked masculine. There's also no gender for we, right? Because we don't really have that kind of, we have a kind of genderless language. So those are some things to kind of notice. Also, notice how many times the word are is repeated in to be in English. I have it 1, 2, 3, 4 times repeated. And if you look at these, not one is repeated ever, right? So that's going to be kind of a general rule with conjugation and Spanish, which is that if you have a subject and you have a verb, the two are tied together and there's only ever going to be one possibility for each person, right? You can kind of think of the subject and the verb as being, I don't know, Romeo and Juliet, right? Tied together in death for all eternity, only ever loving each other, and there's only one Romeo, there's only one Juliet, right? There's only ever going to be one subject and one verb possibility for all sentences, right? Okay, vamos a ver ser, ¿no? Yo soy, tú eres, él, ella, usted es. Nosotros somos, vosotros sois. Ellos, ellas, ustedes son. Now already you may be thinking, wait a minute, I just said, how are you? But this isn't this over here. What does that mean? Well, in Spanish we actually have two ways of saying the verb to be, right? And actually, we also have two words of saying the verb to have, and we have two ways of saying lots of other different types of things, okay? Like two ways of saying the verb to know, right? So there are lots of verbs in Spanish that have specificity as opposed to generality. Whereas in English, we have the opposite, right? Our verbs tend to border on general over specific. So we add a lot of words, right, to indicate meaning. In Spanish, it's going to go the other way, right? You have one verb, it means something super, super specific, and it means something within the context of that sentence that can't be replaced with just any other verb, right? So that's something to kind of remember. Right? So in Spanish, we're going to veer towards specificity. All you need to know for now is that estar is going to be used in things that could change within 12 hours, and ser is going to be used for things that are considered to be more permanent, right? Such as nationality, origin, the time, right? Because it always is going to be the same every single day, days of the week, right? Because they're always going to be the same every single week. Days within the calendar because they come every year. Descriptions of people, right? Because, you know, you can change your nose, but you're going to have to go see a doctor to do that, and it's going to take a little while. Things like this, right? All of those things are going to take a little while to change, professions, vocations, etc. So those are things that are going to use ser. Okay, vamos a ver. Si es yo de Panamá, yo soy de Panamá. Elena de Chiapas. Elena, ¿sí? Elena, es ella. Just like if I wrote Mary in English, that would be the same as she. Or if I wrote Mike and I, that would be the same as we in English. Or if I wrote Mike and Mary, that would be the same as they in English, right? Or if I wrote Mike, what I really mean is he. It's the same in Spanish, right? If I have Elena, what I really mean is ella, right? If I had Elena y yo, what I really mean is nosotros. Now, if the yo is me, then it's nosotras, right? Because we're both women. If I have two names, right? Elena y Tomás. It's mixed gender, right? So what I really mean is ellos. Okay? All right. Okay. So Elena really means ella. Ella es. Okay. Isabela y Rogelio, right? Remember, two names, two proper names, right? Means ellos. So, ellos son doctores. Tomás y yo, remember, right? Tomás y yo means me and somebody else, right? So in English that would be we. In Spanish that would be nosotros. Es Tomás y yo somos inteligentes. Tú eres rubia y alta. Now, I wrote some others that you might not be familiar with to help you a little bit with sentence structure. Time is always going to have this version of ser, and it will only either be es, if we're talking about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or son, if we're talking about any of the other times between 2 and 12. Yeah? So here, right, we would say son las 2 de la tarde, right? Time is always going to have ser. And objects will always be third person. So that's the other thing to remember. So unlike objects in English are also third person, but objects are neutral, right? It's it. In Spanish, objects are not genderless and they're not neutral. They have quantity, that is to say number, and they also have gender. So if I'm talking about a bunch of tables, I have to talk about them in the plural form, and they also have to be feminine, right? Because all the tables are girls, okay? If I talk about a bunch of chalkboards, pizarra, right? I also have to talk about them in plural, right? Because I'm talking about more than one, and I have to talk about them as women, right? Because they're all women. If I was talking about a bunch of iPhones, right? Teléfono o celulares, right? If I had a bunch of teléfonos, I would talk about them in plural and in masculine because phones are always boys, okay? So this is something to kind of get used to. It's very different from English, but it's just always going to be true, right? So if I only have one item, I have to talk about it in a singular form. If I have a bunch of items, I have to talk about them in the plural. But I also have to think, is that item masculine or feminine? Is it, and how am I talking about it, right? So objetos, right, which is what objects are in Spanish, they're always going to be this one, right? The last one, which we call third person, right? This second person, first person, this is singular, and this is plural. Okay? So here I have an object, right? La cita, which means a doctor's appointment or an appointment of some kind. And I see, right, that there's no S on the end of it. So I know that means that it's singular. Okay? So la cita es el viernes. Here I have some plural items. So I know they have to be third person and they're plural. So they have to be son. And you notice, right, that the description of them matches their plurality and their gender. Yeah? Those are some things to kind of remember when we're thinking about how to put together ser, right? When we're thinking about descriptions, again, right, we have to match the description to the gender and the number. Here we're singular, but I'm assuming that the person I was thinking of is a girl, right? Because she's rubia, she's blonde, and alta, tall, right? Whereas opposed to alto, which is what I would say if it was a boy. Or here, right, where there's two people that we're talking about, they're plural doctors. Here we have two people that we're talking about, they're plurally intelligent, okay? So we'll think a little bit more about this whenever we think about adjectives in the coming weeks ahead, but that's just something to remember for now, as I know that soon you're going to be writing sentences. So that's a little bit for now, and I will see you in week 4.